Smart saving and budgeting. Are you worried about tightening your belt and foregoing the things you enjoy? It need not be so if you do it right. It's all about knowing how to spend and save so that you can have enough left for the important things in life. No matter what your goals are, you will need a plan to achieve them. Here are some tips that you might find helpful. So for example, this person here has all these financial goals. He wants to pay off his education loan. He wants to buy his dream home, provide for his kids' education, and to retire comfortably. So to do all these things requires money and requires financial planning. Inflation can affect the value of your savings. Let's take a look at these two examples. The value of the $5 note you have in your wallet today may not be worth the same in future. Today, that $5 note is enough to buy a plate of chicken rice that costs $3.50. However, in 25 years' time, that same plate of chicken rice will cost you $5.74, assuming an annual 2% inflation rate. So inflation has the effect of making things more expensive as time goes by. And it also affects the value of your money. In this other example, suppose your goal is to have $1,500 to spend every month when you retire at 62 years old. If annual inflation is 2%, your $1,500 today will only be worth $1,231 in 10 years' time and $1,009 in 20 years' time. So inflation causes the value of your savings to decrease over time. We will now look at some tips on how to stay ahead in the area of savings and budgeting. Set aside your money in suitable ways that allow your savings to grow faster than the rate of inflation. Starting to save early also means giving your money more time to grow. Do you know that if you want to have $50,000 in 20 years' time, you will need to set aside at least $187.50 per month in savings or in investment that gives an annual rate of return of 1%. If you only start saving 10 years later, you'll need to set aside at least $395 per month to achieve that same amount. Tip number 1. Saving is important. In order to save more, some have to earn more, while some have to learn to spend less. It's all up to you. Tip number 2. You can never save using this formula. Salary minus expenses equals savings. In other words, when you get your salary, after minusing expenses, then you save the rest. Instead, use this formula. Salary minus savings equals expenses. In other words, when you get your salary, set aside a portion for savings first before spending the rest. Tip number 3. Budgeting helps to set the parameters for you to spend within your means and reduce the possibility of overstretching your finances. Tip number 4. The trick to saving is to watch the daily expense. If you are a cigarette smoker, cutting down by less than 1.5 sticks a day would amount to 2 packets each month. Depending on the brand, savings of between $15 to $24 a month can be achieved. Most people like to have a cup of coffee or some other beverage with their lunch, With an average of 22 working days, on average the cost is probably closer to $30. Cutting down on some of these helps in your savings too. Tip number 5. Always fulfill your obligations first. For example, your tax, parents' maintenance, tithe, etc. Tip number 6. Use it up. Wear it out. Make it do or do without. Don't spend money on things you don't need. Tip number 7. Set up an emergency fund. It can be 3 to 6 months worth of wages or expenses. As a start, make a schedule to regularly deposit into your new savings account and stick to it. Start small, like $10 a week, then $20 a week. Next thing you know, you might even be saving hundreds a month. Tip number 8. Buy when you need it, not when you want it. Avoid using credit card unless you make it a point to make full payment within the date. When getting bonus at the end of the year, ensure that we put aside for school expenses, for example, school books, uniforms, and school shoes. Put aside some money for long-term investments. Tip number 9. Don't depend on CPF alone to do the savings. Instead, create a bank account that is different from the one you normally use for daily spending. I personally create three bank accounts from 3 different banks. One for my future studies, another for emergency use, and lastly for daily use. Tip number 10. Not all good things are hopelessly expensive. Stretching the dollar requires good product knowledge, not just brand names. Tip number 11. Start young, start small, start now. Start young. When kids start to save at a young age, it will become a habit. Start small. Every penny counts. You can start saving and increase the saving amount gradually. Start now. If you don't start now, then when? Tip number 12. The key to financial independence is to ensure that your annual expenditure is less than your annual income. You can visit our Money Sense Facebook page for more great tips.